soft diner ambiance, clinking plates, low chatter. Then slap! A sudden silence. The sound was so loud, it stopped the entire diner. A 9-year-old black girl sat frozen in her seat, her cheek burning, her eyes wide with shock. People stared, but no one moved. And the boy who slapped her? He laughed because he thought he could, because people like him always get away with it. But what he didn't know was that her father wasn't just any man. He was someone with power, influence, a man who had built empires in the shadows and who would burn the entire city down before he let his daughter's dignity be stolen. This is the story of how one slap, one act of hatred had set off a chain of events that destroyed an empire, exposed a secret world, and forced an entire city to face its prejudice. Pause. Voice drops softer, more intimate. Observe. Because by the end of this story, you'll be asking yourself a question. If you were there, would you have stood up or stayed silent? The bell above the diner door jingled, a soft, almost cheerful sound that clashed violently with the tension simmering inside. At the corner booth, beneath the neon glow of a flickering open 24 hours sign, 9-year-old Amara Lewis clutched a straw paper in her small hands, twisting it nervously as she waited for her pancakes. It was supposed to be a simple Sunday morning, but hatred had other plans. "Hey!" a voice sneered from behind her. Heavy footsteps followed, the kind that made the linoleum tremble. Logan Mitchell, 17, broad-shouldered and dripping with arrogance, towered over her table. His friends snickered like hyenas circling prey. "What's a girl like you doing here?" he hissed, leaning closer. "Shouldn't you be eating somewhere else?" The room went quiet. Forks froze mid-air. Conversations died in throats. Amara's chest tightened. She'd felt eyes like his before. The kind that didn't see her as a person, only a target. She whispered, "I'm just waiting for my breakfast." Logan's lip curled. And then smack! The sound echoed through the diner like a gunshot. Her cheek stung. Her straw fell to the floor, and every pair of eyes that had turned away before was now glued to the sight of a little black girl trembling, a red mark blooming on her face. "Next time," Logan spat. "Know your place," the waitress gasped. A man near the counter stood up, fists clenched, but Logan only laughed, tossing a few bills on the table as if buying his cruelty. What none of them knew, not Logan, not his friends, not even the stunned customers, was that this single slap would unravel a chain of events that would change everything. Because Amara's father was no ordinary man, and this was only the beginning. The slap still rang in Amara's ears hours later, a phantom sting on her cheek that refused to fade. But the pain wasn't just physical. It was deeper, sharper, a humiliation she couldn't quite name. She sat on the edge of her bed in their small 2-story home on the south side of Chicago, legs dangling, eyes fixed on the floor. Morning light filtered through half-closed blinds, painting faint stripes across her brown skin. On the dresser sat the half-finished Lego set her dad promised they'd finish together. It now felt like part of a world that didn't belong to her. Amara was 9, but in many ways older than her years. She loved drawing, people, trees, worlds that didn't exist, and her teachers always praised her imagination. "You have an artist's heart," Mrs. Green would say. But even in her art, shadows lurked. Her drawings had walls, fences, locked doors. It wasn't because her life lacked love, quite the opposite. Her father, Marcus Lewis, showered her with it. Every night he'd tuck her in with a story about strong women and brave men who stood up for what was right. But even he couldn't shield her from the ugliness that seeped through the cracks of the world. And yesterday, at that diner, the ugliness had worn a human face. "I didn't do anything wrong," she whispered into the empty room, as if saying it aloud could make it accurate. But deep inside, something had shifted. A quiet voice, one she didn't yet understand, whispered, "Never again." Downstairs, Marcus stood in the kitchen, stirring sugar into his coffee, though he hadn't taken a sip. The morning news droned on about politics, but his mind was elsewhere. replaying the image of his daughter walking through the front door last night with swollen eyes and trembling hands. Marcus wasn't a man who scared easily. In fact, most people would say he was the kind of man others should fear. At 45, he had the presence of someone who commanded rooms without trying, tailored suits, calm tone, the type of authority that didn't need to raise his voice. To the outside world, Marcus was a successful businessman who owned several trucking companies and a private security firm. But those who knew the city's underbelly knew better. Marcus Lewis was the quiet architect of Chicago's most powerful black organized crime network, a man whose phone calls could change lives or end them. They called him the gentleman because he never raised his voice, never lost his temper, and never forgave an insult to his family. When Amara told him what happened, every word, every sneer, every hateful laugh, Marcus didn't react. He just placed his hands on the table, exhaled slowly, and said nothing. But inside, something ancient stirred. He put his hands on my daughter, in broad daylight, and no one stopped him. The city had feared Marcus for many reasons over the years, but they had never seen him angry. Danielle Lewis, Amara's mother, hovered near the doorway, pretending to wipe down the counter. In truth, she was studying Marcus, the way his jaw tightened, the way his eyes never blinked. Danielle was a school counselor, a woman who believed in laws, in forgiveness, in the slow arc of justice. But she had also lived long enough to know the system rarely bent in their favor. She placed a gentle hand on Marcus's shoulder. "We should call the police," she said softly. Marcus's lips curved into a humorless smile. "And what will they do? A slap, maybe a fine, maybe nothing." Danielle knew he was right. But the alternative, the one she saw flickering behind his calm exterior, terrified her. "Marcus," she whispered, "don't do something you can't take back." He didn't answer. But his silence was answer enough. Across town, Logan Mitchell lounged in the back seat of his father's Escalade, scrolling through his phone. The incident at the diner was already fading from his memory. Just another funny story to share with his friends. Bro, the look on her face, he laughed into a group chat. Like she actually thought she belonged there. Logan wasn't evil in the way movies portrayed villains. He was worse, entitled. Raised in wealth and protected by a father whose name opened doors, he had never faced a real consequence in his life. His father, Richard Mitchell, was a powerful real estate mogul with deep political connections. Everyone in town knew him. Everyone wanted his approval. And Logan wore that privilege like armor, but arrogance has a way of blinding people. And Logan was blind to the storm he'd just summoned. That night, Marcus sat alone in his study. The only light came from the faint glow of a desk lamp, illuminating a wall lined with books, some about history, others about men who'd changed it. He thought about his grandfather, who'd marched in Selma, about his father, who'd been denied bank loans because of the color of his skin, about every humiliation swallowed and every injustice endured, and now someone had laid a hand on his child. Marcus picked up an old photograph, a picture of Amara at age 3, sitting on his shoulders, laughing. "I promised you I'd keep her safe," he murmured to the photo, and promises, in Marcus's world, were sacred. Later that week, a black sedan pulled into a quiet parking lot behind a shuttered jazz club. Marcus stepped out, the chill wind tugging at his coat. Inside, 3 men waited, his most trusted lieutenants, Darnell, a former Marine, Luis, a quiet strategist with a talent for digging up secrets, and Trey, a loyal enforcer who treated Amara like a niece. "She told me what happened," Marcus said, voice low and controlled. "His name is Logan Mitchell, 17, son of Richard Mitchell," Luis whistled softly. "Mitchell? As in that Mitchell?" "The same," Marcus replied. Darnell leaned back. "We could make this disappear." "A warning, a little pressure. The kid'll apologize." Marcus shook his head. "No, this isn't about an apology. This is about a message. They think they can humiliate us in public and walk away. They think our children are still meant to know their place. It's time they learn who we are." The room fell silent. Everyone understood the weight of what Marcus was saying. This wasn't going to be a slap on the wrist. This was going to be war. Meanwhile, Amara had changed too. Something inside her had hardened. When her art teacher asked her to draw a happy memory, she sketched a diner. But this time, the girl at the table stood tall, unafraid, surrounded by people cheering her on. At night, she overheard whispers from her father's study and plans, names, places. She didn't understand it all, but she felt something big was coming. "Daddy," she asked one evening as he tucked her into bed, "will he ever hurt anyone else?" Marcus brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "Not if I can help it. It wasn't a promise. It was a vow." In a glass-walled office overlooking the city, Richard Mitchell was unaware of the storm brewing beneath his feet. He was too busy closing a multi-million-dollar property deal, shaking hands with men who smiled too much and meant none of it. "Congratulations, Richard," a city councilman said, clapping him on the back. "You've done it again. Another neighborhood, another fortune," Richard laughed. "All in a day's work." But deep inside, a faint worry tugged at him. Logan had been suspended twice already this semester. Fights, harassment, misunderstandings. Richard had always handled it. A call here, a donation there, but lately, it was getting harder to keep the boy's behavior out of the headlines. Still, he pushed the thought away. Boys will be boys, he told himself. Money fixes everything. He was about to learn how wrong he was. One night, Logan was walking home from a party when a black SUV slowed beside him. The window rolled down just enough for a voice to drift out. "Your father can't protect you from everything." The SUV drove off into the night, leaving Logan frozen on the sidewalk. He laughed it off when he told his friends the next day, but deep down, a seed of fear had been planted. At school, whispers followed Amara down the hallway. Some kids avoided her, afraid of getting caught in the crossfire. Others mocked her, repeating Logan's words with cruel grins. She should have stayed where she belongs. It broke her heart, but it also built her resolve. Each insult was a brick in a wall she was building inside herself, one made of strength and quiet fury. If you were in her place, the narrator's voice asks here, would you stay silent, or would you fight back? 2 weeks later, Louise slid a manila folder across Marcus's desk. Inside were photos, bank records, and documents that painted a very different picture of Richard Mitchell's empire. Bribes, fraud, connections to corrupt city officials. "This isn't just about Logan," Louise said quietly. "His father's got skeletons stacked to the ceiling." Marcus stared at the folder for a long moment. "Then it's time we opened the closet. By the end of the month, the stage was set." Logan continued to act untouchable. Richard basked in power. And Marcus waited. Every move was calculated. Every conversation, every rumor, every whisper, part of a plan that was unfolding with surgical precision. And yet, beneath the cold strategy, a father's rage burned hotter with each passing day. Because this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice, the kind no court could deliver. And when the reckoning came, it wouldn't be quiet. It would be legendary. The first snowfall of the season dusted Chicago in a soft white blanket, masking the city's darker undercurrents beneath a temporary illusion of peace. But for Marcus Lewis, peace was an idea he'd buried the moment Logan Mitchell's hand touched his daughter's face. Now, there was only one purpose: cold, deliberate, and unstoppable. He stood at the window of his office overlooking the river, watching snowflakes drift lazily past the glass. Behind him, the door creaked open. Louise stepped in, holding a folder thick with documents. "It's all here," Louise said, setting it on the mahogany desk. "Shell companies, offshore accounts, bribes to 3 city officials, 1 judge, and a state senator. Richard Mitchell's whole operation is filthy, dressed in a suit." Marcus flipped through the pages, nodding slowly. Each photo, each transaction, each piece of evidence was a weapon, not of bullets or blades, but of exposure. And in his world, truth could be more lethal than any gun. "Good," Marcus murmured. "Now we move." Later that night, the back room of an abandoned jazz bar buzzed with hushed voices. Marcus sat at the head of a worn oak table, the same men who'd been with him for decades seated around it. Darnell, arms crossed, Trey, tapping his fingers restlessly. Luis, expression calm as always. This isn't about a kid anymore, Darnell said, breaking the silence. We're going to war with one of the most connected men in Chicago. You sure about this? Marcus looked up from the folder, his eyes steady. He raised a monster and let him loose on my daughter. And he thinks his money makes him untouchable. Trey slammed his palm on the table. Then let's show him what untouchable really means. Luis leaned forward. We have 3 options. Quiet pressure, make him pay, humiliate his son, and move on. Legal exposure, drop. This file anonymously to the press and law enforcement. Burn it all. Dismantle. His empire piece by piece until he's begging for mercy. Marcus's gaze lingered on the last page of the file. A photo of Amara smiling, missing 2 front teeth, holding his hand at a park. Number 3, he said, voice low and final. We burn it all. The next few weeks unfolded like a carefully choreographed symphony. Marcus's men infiltrated Mitchell's operations from the inside. Low-level employees were paid off, accountants coerced, data siphoned. Every move was subtle, every step deliberate. Step 1. Reputation. Leaks began to surface in small online forums and independent news sites about questionable zoning deals linked to Richard Mitchell's company. At first, no one paid attention, but the stories multiplied. Step 2. Financial disruption. Anonymous tips led regulators to freeze several of Mitchell's accounts, pending investigation. Suddenly, construction projects stalled. Investors grew nervous. Step 3. Social pressure. Videos surfaced of Logan's previous bullying incidents, cell phone footage long buried, now mysteriously appearing on social media. Overnight, Logan went from rich kid to violent racist in the public eye. Sir, Luis reported one afternoon, Mitchell's partners are starting to distance themselves. 2 have already canceled contracts. He's bleeding money, Marcus nodded. Make him bleed more. One cold evening in a dimly lit parking garage, Marcus met with Carla Reyes, a journalist known for taking down corrupt officials. She adjusted her glasses and opened the folder Marcus had slid across the table. Where did you get this? She asked. Call it a concerned citizen, Marcus replied. This is career-ending stuff. If even half of this is true, Richard Mitchell is done. It's all true, Marcus said. And there's more where that came from. But you need to time the release, piece by piece. Make it impossible for them to bury, Carla smirked. You're not just trying to ruin him. You're trying to erase him. Marcus didn't smile back. He tried to erase my daughter's dignity. Now we'll see how it feels. Meanwhile, Amara was changing too. The timid girl who once twisted straw wrappers at a diner table had begun to find her voice. At school, when classmates mocked her, she stared them down. When a teacher ignored her raised hand, she spoke louder. Her art, once filled with sadness, now depicted resistance, fists raised, crowds marching, walls broken down. Mrs. Green noticed. This one, the teacher said, holding up a drawing of a small girl facing down a giant shadow. Is powerful, Amara. What's it about? It's about not being small, she said, but the truth was, she still sometimes felt small. She still had nightmares, flashes of that moment, the sting of the slap. And in those moments, she clung to one belief. Daddy is going to make it right. It was only a matter of time before Richard Mitchell struck back. Find out who's behind this, he barked into the phone one evening, pacing his office. I don't care what it costs. His fixer, a wiry man named Tom Delgado, returned 2 days later with a slim dossier. There's chatter on the street. They say Marcus Lewis is involved. Richard frowned. Lewis, the trucking guy? Tom's lips twitched. That's what he wants people to think. But he's connected, deep. And you don't want to make an enemy out of him, Richard laughed. Please, everyone has a price. Tom looked away. Not this one. For Logan, the world was shrinking. Overnight, he'd become a pariah. His so-called friends ghosted him. Teachers watched him like a hawk. People whispered when he walked by. One night, a brick smashed through his bedroom window. On it was a note. Monsters don't always stay hidden. He stared at the shattered glass, heart hammering. Was it just a prank or something more? He didn't know. But for the first time in his life, Logan Mitchell was afraid. 2 weeks into the campaign, Trey and Darnell were tailing one of Mitchell's lawyers when they noticed an unmarked SUV following them. Within days, Marcus's phone was tapped. Anonymous calls began. Surveillance cameras turned up outside his office. "They're watching us," Darnell warned. Marcus remained calm. Good. That means they're scared. Then came the first real blow. Carla's article dropped in a major news outlet. Headline, City Real Estate Kingpin Tied to Bribery Scandal. Federal probe launched. The fallout was immediate. Richard's company lost 2 major investors in 24 hours. A congressional ethics committee launched an inquiry, and a local news anchor ended her segment with, "Sources say this may be just the tip of the iceberg." At the Lewis household, the television glowed as the report played. Danielle looked at Marcus with worry. "This is getting dangerous," she said. "It already was dangerous," Marcus replied quietly. "Now it's just visible." A week later, Richard Mitchell showed up at Marcus's office unannounced, flanked by 2 bodyguards. The temperature in the room seemed to drop as the 2 men locked eyes. "You've made a mistake," Richard said, his voice a low growl. "You're playing a game you can't win." Marcus leaned back in his chair, unbothered. "This isn't a game, Richard. It's a reckoning." "Walk away," Richard hissed, "before someone gets hurt." Marcus stood, stepping closer until their faces were inches apart. Someone already did. The room fell silent. Richard turned and left, but Marcus knew. The gloves were off now. That night, Marcus sat alone in the living room, the glow of the city lights spilling through the window. Danielle joined him, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "Are you sure this is the right way?" she asked. "What if Amara sees what you're becoming?" Marcus stared out at the skyline. "I'm doing this for her, so she never has to live in fear again. But what if you're teaching her that fear is the only way to get respect?" Her words lingered long after she went to bed. One evening, as Marcus tucked Amara in, she looked up at him with wide eyes. "Daddy, will that boy say sorry?" Marcus hesitated. "Maybe. But some people don't know how to say sorry." "Then what happens?" "Then," he said softly, "they learn what sorry feels like." One snowy afternoon, Marcus received a call from an old friend, a retired detective named Samuel Briggs. "I've heard whispers," Samuel said. "Richard's getting desperate. He's talking to people you don't want involved." "What kind of people?" "The kind who don't care about rules." Marcus's grip tightened around the phone. "Then neither do I." Luis burst into the office one night, grinning triumphantly. "We found it," he said, dropping a flash drive onto Marcus's desk. It was the smoking gun, documents tying Richard Mitchell to a decades-old arson for insurance scam that had cost 3 lives, buried, forgotten, until now. "With this," Louis said, "he's not just finished. He's going to prison." Marcus stared at the drive. This was it, the key to everything. But something inside him hesitated. If he used it, there would be no going back, no second chances. And yet, the image of Amara's tear-streaked face on that diner floor left no room for hesitation. "Release it," Marcus said. In the final days before the storm broke, the city buzzed with rumors. Investigators swarmed Richard's offices. Logan withdrew from school. And somewhere in a quiet diner on the south side, the very one where it all began, Amara sat at a booth again, sketching in her notebook, unafraid this time. The waitress recognized her. "You're back," she said with a smile. Amara nodded. "I like it here now." But outside, in the shadows across the street, Marcus's men watched. And a black SUV idled silently, one final piece of unfinished business lingering before the inevitable confrontation, because this wasn't over. Not yet. Snow hammered the city that night, coating the streets in white silence, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the city itself was holding its breath. But inside the grand ballroom of the Hilton downtown Chicago, the air was anything but quiet. It hummed with laughter, champagne glasses clinking, and the empty promises of powerful men as they congratulated each other. At the center of it all stood Richard Mitchell, grinning for cameras beneath a banner that read, Businessman of the Year. He shook hands with city officials, posed with senators, and basked in the glow of influence, a king among kings. But as the flashbulbs popped and the applause swelled, Richard didn't know that wolves were already inside the castle walls. "Are we ready?" Marcus asked quietly, standing in the back of a black SUV 2 blocks away. Luis tapped his earpiece. "Camera feeds are live. Carla's team is standing by. The press is on site. And the final delivery?" Marcus asked. Trey handed him a small USB drive. "This has everything. The arson documents, the bribes, the offshore accounts. Once this hits the media servers, Mitchell's empire collapses." Marcus stared out the tinted window toward the hotel. "Let's finish this." Richard had just stepped up to the podium to deliver his acceptance speech when the lights flickered once, twice, then died completely. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the room plunged into darkness. A beat later, emergency lighting bathed the ballroom in a dim red glow. A single projector screen on the far wall blinked to life. And then, documents began flashing across it, bank transfers, bribe records, photos of secret meetings, and finally, the 2003 arson report that killed 3 people, signed by Richard Mitchell. The room fell silent. Then came the whispers. Then the gasps. "What is this?" someone shouted. "Is this real?" "Richard, what the hell is this?" Richard's face drained of color. He spun toward his head of security. "Shut it down, now!" But it was too late. The information had already been uploaded to 3 major news outlets. Phones buzzed. The cameras rolled. The world was watching. As chaos erupted inside, the ballroom doors opened, and in walked Marcus Lewis. For a moment, the 2 men locked eyes across the room. The noise faded. The crowd disappeared. It was just them. Richard's nostrils flared. "You!" he hissed, storming forward. "You think this ends with a slideshow? You think you can humiliate me?" Marcus didn't flinch. "You humiliated yourself the moment you raised a monster. You're ruining my life." Marcus stepped closer, his voice calm, almost too calm. "You ruined mine the second your son put his hands on my daughter." Richard's face twisted. "You're doing all this over a slap?" "No," Marcus said, leaning in until their foreheads almost touched. "I'm doing this because my little girl learned, at 9 years old, that the world thinks she doesn't belong. And I'm here to make sure she never learns that lesson again." Before Richard could reply, a voice from the back of the ballroom shouted, "Mr. Mitchell! Care to comment on the evidence? Are you stepping down? Will you cooperate with the investigation?" Dozens of reporters swarmed the podium. Cameras flashed in a frenzy. Richard pushed through the crowd, sweating, shouting, trying to maintain control. But the harder he struggled, the deeper he sank. "Get out of my way!" he barked, and then, in a moment of blind panic, he shoved a journalist to the ground. The room gasped. Cameras captured every second. In that instant, Richard Mitchell, untouchable titan of industry, wasn't a king anymore. He was just another desperate man caught in the light, and then something no one expected happened. As Richard stumbled back, pale and trembling, a new voice echoed through the ballroom speakers, a voice no one had heard in public for decades. "Richard Mitchell," it said. "This is a message from someone you forgot." The projector changed. A grainy video filled the screen. A younger Richard sat at a table 20 years ago, flanked by men with cold eyes and darker suits. Among them was a familiar face, Anthony "Tony" DeSantis, the notorious Chicago mob boss believed dead since 2007, except he wasn't dead. And Richard was sitting beside him, signing documents that tied Mitchell Real Estate to DeSantis's crime syndicate, money laundering, racketeering, and a long list of federal felonies. The room exploded. "This is a bombshell!" "Oh my God. He was working with the Mafia!" Richard's legs buckled. He collapsed into a chair, face in his hands. Everything, his empire, his reputation, his legacy, was gone. And across the room, Marcus Lewis stood silent, watching it all unfold. Security moved in. Federal agents slipped through the crowd. Richard's lawyer whispered frantically in his ear, but it was useless. He was finished. As they led him away, he twisted his head toward Marcus, eyes burning with hate. "You think you've won? You're no better than me." Marcus stepped closer so only Richard could hear. "The difference is I fight for my family." "You destroyed yours." Richard spat on the floor. "This isn't over." Marcus gave a small, cold smile. "For you it is." Outside, in the freezing wind, Logan stood near the valet line, trembling. Reporters shoved microphones in his face, asking about his father, about the scandals, about the video. He had no answers. For the first time in his life, he was nobody. No protection, no privilege, just a scared teenager who'd learned that actions, even those meant to humiliate a child, can burn down entire worlds. And then, as the police cruisers pulled away with his father inside, Logan saw her, Amara. She was standing across the street holding her mother's hand. Their eyes met for a moment. His full of regret, hers steady and unflinching. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. There was nothing to say. As the media storm raged and Richard's empire crumbled, one final truth began to circulate, whispered first in back alleys, then in police reports. Marcus Lewis wasn't just a businessman. He was the man Tony DeSantis had chosen as his successor, the real power behind the scenes. The ghost the city feared but never saw, and now that ghost had stepped into the light, not as a criminal, not as a villain, but as a father who had reminded the city that some lines, once crossed, demand a reckoning. By midnight, the hotel was empty. Snow still fell, erasing footprints from the sidewalks, as if trying to hide the chaos that had erupted hours earlier. Marcus stood beneath a street lamp, hands in his coat pockets, watching the flashing red and blue lights fade into the distance. Trey joined him, lighting a cigarette. "It's done," Trey said. "Not yet," Marcus replied, "but it will be." He turned to look across the street where Amara was waiting by the car with Danielle. She waved. He smiled faintly. In that moment, the war was over. The wound wasn't. But maybe, healing could begin. The morning after the gala, Chicago woke to a city forever changed. Newspapers screamed headlines in bold, unforgiving letters. "Real estate kingpin arrested in Mafia scandal. Richard Mitchell charged with fraud, arson, and racketeering. Fall of a tycoon, how a single slap exposed a criminal empire." Talk radio buzzed with outrage. Cable news played a loop of footage of Richard shoving a journalist. And on social media, videos of Logan's past bullying, the diner incident among them, went viral with millions of views and thousands of furious comments. "Justice," one tweet read, "served ice cold." Within 48 hours, federal agents raided Mitchell Real Estate. Offices were sealed, files seized, accounts frozen. Richard was denied bail. His allies, once so loud, vanished into silence. Politicians who'd taken his money now distanced themselves, calling for investigations. Logan withdrew from public school under a storm of threats and media attention. Gone were the days of smirks and cruelty. Now every step he took felt watched. Every word he spoke was met with suspicion. At home, he barely spoke. He spent hours staring at the ceiling, replaying that day at the diner over and over. For the first time, he understood what it meant to break someone, and how easily it could all come back to hurt you. Life for the Lewis family didn't change overnight. Amara still flinched at sudden noises. Marcus still woke at 3 a.m., pacing the living room in silence. But something had shifted. One bright Saturday, Amara asked to go back to that same diner, the place where everything began. Danielle hesitated, but Marcus nodded. "If that's what she wants," he said. This time, when they walked in, the waitress recognized them instantly and rushed over. "I'm so sorry for what happened here," she whispered, eyes misty. "We should have done more." Amara smiled, a small, brave smile. "It's okay. I'm not scared anymore." They sat at the same booth, ordered the same pancakes, and this time no one stared, no one whispered. The silence wasn't heavy now. It was peaceful. As they left, Marcus lingered by the door, gazing at the snow-covered street. He wasn't proud of everything he'd done, but he was sure of one thing: he'd kept his promise. His daughter's dignity, her place in the world, was hers again. Trey's voice echoed in his mind from weeks ago. We burn it all. And they had. But from the ashes, something new was growing: respect, accountability, and a city forced to confront its own ugliness. Across town, Richard sat alone in a cell. And Logan, too, had begun a long road, one paved with regret and silence. But for the Lewis family, the nightmare had become something else. A reminder that even the smallest voice, even a little girl with trembling hands, can shake the foundations of power when love stands behind her. In the end, it wasn't about money. It wasn't about power. It wasn't even about revenge. It was about a promise made by a father to his daughter that no one would ever make her feel small again. And it was about a little black girl who refused to let a cruel world decide her worth. The slap that humiliated Amara. Lewis in a diner wasn't just an act of hatred. It was a mirror held up to a society still poisoned by prejudice and arrogance. But what happened next proved something far more critical. Injustice doesn't need to be met with silence. It can be met with strength, unity, and an unshakable belief that dignity is not negotiable. And as the dust settled over Chicago, people began to ask themselves hard questions. Why did no one stop Logan? Why did the crowd stay silent? And how many other Amaras are still sitting quietly in booths around the world, swallowing pain they should never have to endure? Marcus Lewis knew one thing: silence was the soil where hate grows. But courage, even the quiet kind, is how you uproot it. So as you sit here now watching this story unfold, I want you to think about this. If you saw someone being humiliated because of the color of their skin, would you stand by, or would you stand up? If that slap had happened in your workplace, your school, or your neighborhood, what would you do? Because sometimes justice doesn't come from courts or headlines. Sometimes it starts with a single choice to say no more, and that choice could change everything. At Hidden Struggles, we go deeper, where emotion meets evidence and drama reveals the system. If this story made you pause, reflect, or feel something, don't forget to subscribe. There's more to come.